Have you ever had that moment, the one where everything starts to fall into place, where you're finally on the edge of something good, something better? Maybe it's a healthier routine, or a relationship that actually feels safe, or a career path that finally aligns with your passion. You can feel the shift happening. Your energy is rising, your focus sharpens, even your body starts cooperating. And then, almost without warning, something in you begins to pull back. Slowly at first, you skip one workout. You answer that one text you know you shouldn't. You procrastinate just a little too long. And before you know it, you're watching the life you wanted slip away again, and you have no idea why. I used to think this was just me being lazy or undisciplined. That's what we're taught to believe, right? Hustle culture, self-improvement mantras. They all make it sound like if you mess up, it's because you didn't want it enough. But that's not true. At least not for me. I did want it. I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to be seen, really seen in a relationship. I wanted to feel like I mattered in my work. But every time I got close, it was like something inside me hit the brakes. And it wasn't a small nudge. It was like pulling the emergency stop on a moving train. Jarring. Sudden. Unexplainable. I remember one time years ago, after a wake-up call at the doctor's office, I decided to take control of my health. I was all in, working out, cooking real food, sleeping like a human being. I felt incredible. People started noticing, complimenting. Even my blood work came back glowing. And then I stopped, just like that. I made excuses at first. Just one skipped workout. I've earned it. Just a little dessert. I'm tired. I'll get back on track tomorrow. But I didn't. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, I was back to square one. Sluggish, disconnected, frustrated. It didn't make sense. I knew better. I had the evidence that what I was doing was working, but some hidden part of me seemed determined to undo it all. It felt personal, like I was at war with myself. That same pattern showed up in relationships too. I'd meet someone kind, someone emotionally available, and for a while I'd let myself believe I deserved that. But then I'd start picking fights over nothing, or ghosting them emotionally. I'd shut down, withdraw, or suddenly become too busy, and I'd tell myself it wasn't working, that they weren't the right one. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of being known, maybe even scared of being happy. And I started asking myself the question I'd avoided for a long time. Why do I keep sabotaging the things I want most? I remember reading something once that hit me like a punch to the gut. It said, self-sabotage is just a survival mechanism in disguise. That sentence cracked something open in me. What if I wasn't broken? What if the part of me that was doing the damage wasn't trying to ruin my life, but trying, in some strange way, to protect me? That thought haunted me for days, and then I found myself going down a rabbit hole of psychology books, podcasts, essays. That's when I stumbled on Jung. Carl Jung, the guy who talked about the shadow. I'd heard of him before, but this time it was different. I was ready to hear what he had to say, that we all have parts of ourselves we bury, repress, deny, not because they're bad, but because somewhere along the way we were taught they weren't acceptable. Anger, vulnerability, ambition, need, and when those parts get exiled, they don't die. They wait, and then they show up, not as voices in your head, but as patterns, as self-sabotage, as fear, as the sudden urge to destroy everything that's going right in your life. That was the beginning for me, not of fixing myself, but of learning to listen, learning to stop seeing the parts of me that mess things up as enemies and start seeing them as messengers. I still mess up, a lot. But now when I feel that old urge to pull away, to quit when I'm winning, to choose chaos instead of care, I pause. I try to ask, what are you protecting me from right now? And sometimes the answer comes back as a whisper. being too visible, being hurt again, failing in front of everyone. And I try to meet that whisper with kindness instead of shame. It's not easy, but it's real. And for the first time in my life, it feels like maybe, just maybe, I'm starting to walk alongside myself instead of against. You know what's strange? Once you start digging into this stuff, into your own patterns, it gets both clearer and more confusing at the same time. Because on the one hand, you begin to see the logic behind your behavior. You see how everything connects, how your childhood, your beliefs, even the way people looked at you when you cried, shaped your wiring. But on the other hand, you start to realize just how much of yourself you've been blind to. It's disorienting, like looking at your own reflection and realizing you've never actually seen your full face. I kept coming back to Jung's idea that the unconscious isn't just a garbage bin of repressed feelings. It's an active force, almost like another person living inside you with its own motives, fears, and strategies. That blew my mind. The idea that something in me could have its own agenda, and that agenda could directly oppose what I consciously want, was terrifying and comforting at the same time. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant I wasn't weak. It meant I was divided. And that's when I started thinking about the mask I wear every day. The part of me that smiles when I'm crumbling, that says I'm fine when I'm clearly not. That always knows the right answer in a group conversation. Jung called it the persona, the socially acceptable version of ourselves we put forward so we can survive, fit in, be liked. I had a pretty solid persona. People saw me as capable, kind, thoughtful, and I am all those things, but they're not the whole truth, not even close. What the persona hides is the shadow, the parts of us we deny, repress, or never got to develop. And here's the kicker. The shadow doesn't just contain what's dark or bad. It also holds our power, our assertiveness, our creativity, our mess, our hunger, our fire, the stuff that got us in trouble as kids, the parts no one praised, the wildness that had to be tamed. I started journaling about it. I'd ask myself questions like, what am I afraid people would see if I stopped performing? Or, what part of me scares me the most? And the answers were raw. I was afraid they'd see how angry I can get, how needy I actually am, how much I crave love, not just respect. I was scared they'd see how tired I am of being the strong one, how sometimes I don't want to care, don't want to fix things, don't want to be nice. I was afraid that if they saw that version of me, they'd leave. But what scared me even more was realizing that I'd left myself a long time ago. I'd abandoned those parts of me because I thought they were wrong, and now they were coming back, not as whispers, but as sabotage. That was the shadow's revenge. If it couldn't be seen, it would make itself known in other ways, through my self-doubt, through my panic attacks, through my habit of destroying what I build. And man, that realization hurt. It felt like grieving a part of myself I never got to know, like I had locked a child in a basement and forgotten about them, only to realize decades later that they had been banging on the walls the whole time, and the banging was getting louder. It made me think about all the times I'd judged myself harshly for being too emotional, too intense, too much. I saw now that those judgments weren't coming from truth, but from learned shame. Someone taught me that those parts of me were dangerous, and maybe they were back then. Maybe being too emotional in a house where emotions weren't safe really was dangerous. Maybe being ambitious in a family that feared success was threatening. Maybe showing vulnerability in a culture obsessed with toughness was a liability. But I'm not that child anymore, and those rules don't have to apply. That's the part I'm still learning to accept, that I have the power now to reclaim those pieces, to make a new agreement with myself, not to unleash my shadow without care, but to listen to it, to include it, to let it speak. because the alternative, ignoring it, only ensures it will come back louder, messier, and more destructive next time. And it does come back. Every time I stretch outside my comfort zone, every time I get closer to something real, the shadow stirs, not to ruin me, but to be invited in. I wish I could say that once you know this, it all gets easier. It doesn't, but it does get clearer, and there's a quiet power in that clarity. Like finally finding the map to a forest you've been wandering in your whole life. You still have to walk it, but now you know where you're going. There's this strange thing that happens when you begin to really face yourself. Like the deep layers, not just the surface stuff. It's like you unlock a memory that was always there, but never quite in focus. You start seeing patterns you thought were random, people you were drawn to, jobs you kept leaving, dreams you abandoned the moment they started becoming real. You realize you've been here before, many times, and each time you left breadcrumbs, emotional fingerprints, the same fight with a different name, the same disappointment dressed in a new outfit, the same escape disguised as logic. I began to trace the roots of it, this loop I kept living. And what I found wasn't pretty. It went back to places I hadn't thought about in years. My childhood, my parents, the way certain emotions weren't allowed in our house. Not because anyone was cruel, just because they didn't know better. They were surviving too, but the message was clear: don't be too loud, don't ask for too much, don't make people uncomfortable. And I learned. I learned how to shrink, how to be acceptable, how to become who they needed me to be, not who I actually was. And at some point, I started to lose track of the difference. You see, what I didn't realize then, and what took me years to understand, was that I wasn't just adapting, I was fragmenting, splitting off parts of myself that were inconvenient or too much. But those parts didn't disappear. They turned into complexes, emotional echoes from the past that hijack the present. Jung talked about this, how early wounds become clusters of unresolved emotion, and how they activate when something in the present reminds us, even subtly, of that original hurt. It's like your adult self walks into a situation, a new relationship, a job interview, a chance to finally be seen, and suddenly, the 8-year-old inside you takes the wheel, and that kid isn't interested in success. That kid wants safety. That kid remembers what it felt like to be shamed, ignored, or rejected. So they protect you the only way they know how, by pulling you away before it happens again. That's why self-sabotage doesn't feel logical, because it isn't. It's emotional, it's protective. It's the inner child screaming, "Don't go there, we know how this ends." And once I saw that, it broke me open, because I realized how many of my choices weren't really mine. They were echoes, reflexes, old scripts on repeat. And I wasn't a failure. I was scared. I was stuck in a cycle of trying to resolve something I never got to finish, trying to heal through repetition. This is what psychologists call repetition compulsion, that unconscious pull to recreate past wounds, hoping to rewrite the ending. But without awareness, we just re-injure ourselves over and over. We chase unavailable people to prove we're finally worthy. We avoid success because we associate it with being alone. We stay in chaos because peace feels foreign. For me, it was achievement. I could build things, succeed, impress people. But the moment it started to feel real, I'd panic. Because growing up, success came with strings, jealousy, distance, pressure. So I learned to dim myself just enough to stay connected. And now, decades later, that pattern still lived in me, quietly, powerfully, sabotaging my rise the moment it felt too big. And I saw it in others, too. Friends who couldn't hold love without drama. Artists who couldn't create unless they were in pain. Entrepreneurs who'd burn down everything just as it started to thrive. not because they were flawed, but because somewhere deep inside they were terrified of being abandoned, of being envied, of becoming someone they no longer recognized. And the hardest part? These patterns work until they don't. They protect you, but they also imprison you. Because what kept you safe as a child is what keeps you small as an adult. That realization shook something loose in me. I remember sitting on my floor crying, not from shame but from relief, because for the first time I could see the logic behind the madness. I could feel compassion for the parts of me that had been trying to survive. I didn't need to shame them anymore. I needed to thank them, and then, gently, ask them to step aside. This isn't about blaming our parents or wallowing in the past. It's about honoring our story, all of it. It's about understanding that healing isn't just forward movement. Sometimes it's turning around, walking back into those early rooms, and saying to the younger version of you, "I see you. You didn't deserve that. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore." And that changes everything. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing how much of your life has been shaped by things you didn't choose. And I don't mean in the dramatic movie scene kind of way. I mean in the quiet, everyday moments. The way you freeze when someone praises you. The way you back away when you feel loved. The way you sabotage peace the minute it starts to settle in. I used to think of these moments as character flaws, like maybe I was just wired wrong, but now I know better. Now I know they're not flaws, they're strategies, old strategies, outdated systems built by a younger version of me, trying to make sense of a world that didn't always feel safe. And here's where it gets really strange. Those strategies didn't just keep me alive. They made me good at surviving, at adapting, at performing. I became really skilled at navigating life in a way that minimized risk. I could anticipate rejection before it happened, avoid intimacy before it got too close, self-destruct before anyone else could hurt me first. It was like a psychic defense system, always scanning for danger. But the cost? I never let myself win. Not really. I could succeed in ways that looked impressive on the outside, but I never fully let myself receive it. I always had a back door open, an exit plan, just in case. And when I started digging into Jung's idea of the unconscious as a balancing force, it all started to make more sense. He said the psyche isn't trying to punish us when we self-sabotage. It's trying to restore equilibrium, to keep us from becoming too one-sided, too inflated, too cut off from the deeper truth of who we are. So if your conscious mind is all about achievement and control, the unconscious might pull you toward chaos or failure, not to hurt you, but to pull you back toward wholeness. That idea messed with me, because I'd always seen self-sabotage as the enemy. But what if it's not? What if it's a message? What if that part of me that always ruins things is actually trying to protect me from becoming someone I'm not ready to be? I thought about that a lot after a conversation I had with a friend, someone who always seemed calm, grounded, wise. He told me that he used to be a total workaholic, built a business, scaled it fast, became successful, but then one day he just stopped caring, started missing meetings, lost clients, and eventually burned the whole thing down. At first, he was ashamed, thought he was lazy, ungrateful, broken, but when he slowed down and really listened, he realized that a part of him had rebelled, because he had built his entire identity around being needed, around being useful, and that part of him, the one that had never been seen just for existing, finally said, "Enough." It wasn't failure, it was balance. That story hit me hard because I could see myself in it, the constant pressure to perform, to be good, to prove my worth, and how, when I finally get what I think I want, something inside me starts to whisper, "But who are you really without all this?" Jung called it enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposites when pushed to the extreme. If you push too far in one direction, the other side will erupt, sometimes violently. It's like a psychological pendulum swing. And if you ignore that swing, if you keep pushing, keep suppressing, it won't just nudge you, it'll knock you flat. And that's what my self-sabotage started to feel like. A knockdown. A necessary collapse. Not because I was failing, but because I was out of alignment. Because I had built a version of myself that looked strong but was hollow in the places that mattered. And the only way back to something real was through the wreckage. So I stopped trying to fix the behavior. I started asking what it was trying to tell me. When I skipped the gym, what was I really avoiding? When I lashed out at someone I loved, what pain was I trying not to feel? When I procrastinated until everything fell apart, what fear was hiding underneath? The answers weren't always clear. Sometimes they came in dreams, sometimes in the middle of a panic attack, sometimes in the silence after everyone had gone home and I was left alone with my thoughts. But slowly, piece by piece, a pattern started to emerge. My self-sabotage wasn't random, it was rhythmic, predictable, almost elegant in the way it appeared exactly when I got too close to the edge of change. And now I try to meet it with curiosity instead of shame. I try to say, I see you. What are you trying to protect me from? And often the answer is simple: being too big, being too seen, being too much. But here's the thing, I'm learning that being too much was never the problem. It was just never safe before. And maybe now it is. You know what's wild? The closer you get to becoming who you really are, the louder the fear gets. Not the kind of fear that shouts. No, this one whispers. It creeps in like fog. Subtle, quiet, persuasive. It says things like, don't push too far. This isn't who you are. Or, be careful, you might lose everything. And if you're not paying attention, you start to believe it. You start to think the fear is telling the truth. But here's the twist. The fear isn't trying to stop you from growing. It's trying to stop you from dying, not literally, psychologically. The death of the old self. The death of the identity that kept you safe all these years. Because real transformation, it's terrifying, not just because it's unknown, but because it requires a sacrifice. And most of us, if we're honest, are more afraid of becoming who we truly are than of staying stuck. That hit me hard the first time I really let it in. I was journaling one night and I wrote the sentence, maybe I'm not afraid of failure, maybe I'm afraid of becoming someone I no longer recognize. And I just stared at the page, because it was true. I had spent so long constructing this version of me, the agreeable one, the responsible one, the one who didn't make waves, that letting go of that identity felt like betrayal, like treason against the person everyone expected me to be. And yet, that version of me was exhausted. I started to notice how much of my life was organized around avoiding shame. Not joy, not purpose, just the absence of shame. I avoided speaking up because I didn't want to seem arrogant. I downplayed my ideas so no one would think I was trying to be better than them. I sabotaged my own momentum so I wouldn't have to carry the weight of other people's envy, judgment, or unmet expectations. That's when I realized self-sabotage isn't self-hatred, it's self-protection. The only way it becomes self-hatred is when we judge ourselves for doing it. Jung said something that always stuck with me. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And I used to think he was talking about accepting the dark, messy parts, the rage, the insecurity, the jealousy. But now I see it differently. I think he was talking about accepting the brilliance too, the power, the light, the potential that scares the hell out of us, because it means we can no longer hide behind smallness. There's a grief in growth that no one really talks about, because in order to step into your whole self, you have to let go of the version that got you here. And that version It did its job. It kept you alive. It made you acceptable. It helped you survive in a world that demanded masks. So when you start to remove those masks, when you begin to live unarmored, it's not just liberating, it's devastating. You're saying goodbye to the identity that helped you belong, and yet, you know you can't go back. It reminds me of something I once read about snakes, how when they shed their skin, it's not because they want to, it's because staying in the old skin becomes suffocating. That's what this feels like. You don't shed who you were because it was bad. You shed it because you've outgrown it, and if you don't, it starts to hurt. The friction of staying small becomes more painful than the fear of expansion. So now when I feel the pull to sabotage again, when I want to ghost someone I care about, or procrastinate on something that matters, or numb out with distractions, I try to ask myself, what part of me is trying to survive right now? And more importantly, can I let them know they're safe now? Sometimes I still act out the old pattern. I still pull away, still shrink. But now I see it. And that changes everything, because seeing is the first step to choosing. You can't choose what you're not aware of. And when you become aware, you start to realize something beautiful and terrifying, that you are no longer who you were, and that you are not yet who you're becoming. You're in between, in the threshold, in the becoming. And that space, that in-between, it's where all the real transformation happens. There's something sacred about the moment you stop running from yourself. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, it doesn't, but because the chase ends. That exhausting loop of becoming, undoing, trying harder, crashing again, it loses its grip, and in its place, there's just this quiet, unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable, but honest. And in that stillness, you start to hear something you hadn't heard before. Your own voice. Not the voice trained to be polite, not the voice shaped by approval, but the raw one, the real one. That's what started happening to me. Slowly, subtly. I stopped trying to fix myself like I was a broken machine. I stopped chasing the next version of me like she was better than the one I already was. I started sitting with my fear, my anger, my grief, and instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? I started asking, what is this trying to show me? And that changed everything. I began to see my self-sabotage as a teacher, not a demon, not a flaw, a messenger. It wasn't trying to destroy me, it was trying to wake me up. Every panic attack, every impulsive escape, every dramatic meltdown, they weren't signs of weakness. They were signals. Pay attention. Something here needs your love. It's a strange thing, learning how to love the parts of you you were taught to hate. The needy part, the insecure part, the jealous part, the angry, controlling, chaotic part. At first, it feels like inviting monsters into your house. But then you look closer and realize they're just children. Frightened, forgotten children who've been banging on the walls for years, asking to be seen. And when you finally turn toward them, when you stop slamming the door and say, I'm listening, something miraculous happens. They soften, they calm, they start to trust you, not because you've tamed them, but because you've acknowledged them. You've made room for their truth. That's what integration feels like. Not perfection, not a constant state of peace, but relationship. A dynamic, evolving relationship with your inner world. You start to notice the shifts. When your inner critic gets loud, when your wounded child takes the wheel, when your shadow wants to lash out. And instead of being overtaken by it, you can pause, you can breathe, you can choose. That doesn't mean the patterns disappear. They don't. But now, instead of living in you like ghosts, they live with you like guests. You don't have to let them drive, but you can offer them a seat. You can say, I know why you're here, and I've got this now. I remember one morning, I woke up feeling that familiar dread, the kind that used to send me spiraling, But instead of reacting, I just sat with it. I asked, "What's wrong?" And the answer came, clear as day. "I'm afraid of being alone in my joy." It gutted me because I realized I'd learned to associate happiness with separation. Like if I really allowed myself to thrive, I'd lose people. I'd be too different, too distant, too much. And that belief that happiness leads to loss had been running my life. That day, I didn't force myself to be grateful. I didn't try to override the fear with a mantra. I just held it like a friend and whispered, "I won't leave you, even if I'm happy." That was a breakthrough, not because it erased the fear, but because it included it. And that's the essence of Jung's work. Not elimination, but integration. Not light without shadow, but wholeness through both. That's what it means to be human, messy, multiplicitous, capable of great love and great sabotage, of healing and hurting, of expansion and contraction. And once you accept that, life becomes less about performance and more about presence, less about chasing who you're supposed to be, and more about welcoming who you already are. So now, when I catch myself slipping, reaching for an old pattern, reacting out of fear, I don't spiral. I smile, even if it's a sad smile, because I know what's happening, I know who's showing up, and I know how to respond. Not with shame, but with grace, because this is the path. Not a straight line, not a checklist, but a spiral. You revisit the same wounds, the same questions, but each time you bring more awareness, more compassion, more of yourself. And that, I've come to believe, is what healing really is. There's a moment, and it doesn't happen with fanfare or lightning, when you realize you're no longer afraid of your own depth, that you've stood in front of the mirror of your inner world, seen what's been hiding in the corners, and instead of turning away, you stayed. You didn't flinch, you didn't run. You stayed with the trembling, with the rage, with the hunger, and you realized it's all you, and it's all worthy. That moment came for me quietly, not with some grand epiphany, but in the middle of an ordinary day. I was walking, alone, early morning, city still asleep, and I felt it. Not pride, not clarity, not even peace, but wholeness. Like for the first time in a long time, I wasn't split. I wasn't at war with myself. I wasn't trying to be better or smaller or more acceptable. I just was. And that just being, God, it was enough. It's wild how long we live as if we have to earn our own love, as if parts of us must be suppressed, managed, improved, before we deserve to feel whole. We try to earn approval from others because we don't know how to offer it to ourselves. And when people love us, we get suspicious. When things go well, we sabotage. Not because we don't want joy, but because we haven't built a home inside ourselves where joy feels safe to live. But slowly, piece by piece, I've been building that home. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming whole. Not perfect, not enlightened, just whole. Integrated, awake. It's not about shedding your shadow. It's about holding it, living with it, giving it space at your table. And what I've learned, maybe the most beautiful part of all this, is that the shadow holds not just your pain, but your gold, your vitality, your creativity, your desire, your truth. Everything you were taught to mute is where your aliveness actually lives. When I finally allowed myself to feel anger, I discovered passion. When I stopped repressing my sadness, I found empathy. When I embraced my hunger for connection, I stopped settling for relationships that made me feel alone. This work, it's not clean. It's not linear. You'll still have days when the old stories pull you under. You'll still feel afraid. But the difference now is that you won't abandon yourself in that fear. You'll stay. You'll breathe. You'll remember that even your worst moments are part of the story, not a deviation, a doorway. And maybe that's the real magic. learning how to hold both, to be powerful and vulnerable, to feel lost and still worthy, to be a mess and still show up. This is what maturity looks like, not the absence of shadow, but the presence of grace. These days, when I look back at the version of me who used to sabotage everything good, I don't feel shame, I feel compassion. That version of me was doing the best they could with what they knew. They were scared and alone and trying to stay safe. And now they're part of me, not locked away, not silenced, just included. And that inclusion, that deep acceptance of every version of myself, is the most freeing thing I've ever known. So if you're somewhere in this process, unraveling old patterns, facing the shadow, scared of who you're becoming, I just want you to know you're not alone. The pain is part of it. The fear is part of it. But so is the beauty. So is the reclamation. So is the awakening. And I promise you, the version of you waiting on the other side of this, they are not perfect, but they are real, and they are worth meeting. There's something I want to say to you if you're still with me. Something I wish someone had told me when I was deep in the middle of it all, when everything felt like too much and not enough at the same time. It's this: you're not broken. You're unfolding. That sentence saved me. Not because it gave me answers, but because it gave me permission. Permission to stop treating myself like a project. Permission to feel messy, confused, afraid. Permission to be exactly where I was without needing to rush to the next stage. Because this path, this deep inner work, it's not about fixing what's wrong with you. It's about remembering what's always been right. I used to think I had to become someone else to be happy. Someone more disciplined, more calm, more stable. But the truth is, every time I tried to become someone else, I lost more of myself. And it turns out, the only way to find peace was to stop becoming and start unbecoming, shedding everything that wasn't mine. Every mask, every role, every story I inherited but never chose. And as I did, I began to find someone underneath it all. Someone I actually liked. Someone who wasn't perfect, not even close, but who was honest, awake, human. That's the word that keeps coming back to me lately. Human. Not ideal, not impressive, just real. And I think that's what we're all aching for, underneath the striving and performing, to come home to our own humanity. To breathe into the truth that we are enough, not because we've earned it, but because we're here, because we exist. The journey I've shared with you through self-sabotage, shadow work, and integration, it's not over. It never really ends. But it's changed me in a way I can feel in my bones. I don't see my breakdowns as failures anymore. I see them as thresholds, initiations, invitations into deeper wholeness. There's a kind of quiet power that comes from doing this work. Not a loud, look-at-me power, a soft, steady one. The power of knowing who you are, of holding space for every part of yourself, the fierce and the fragile, the broken and the brilliant, of walking into the world without armor, not because you don't need protection, but because you've built safety inside yourself. And that doesn't make you invincible. It makes you free. So now, when I feel the old patterns trying to pull me back, the urge to sabotage, to shut down, to run, I pause, I breathe. I remember that every part of me, even the parts that once caused harm, were born from a need to survive. And I thank them. And then, gently, I lead myself forward. This is the work. Not becoming someone new, but becoming someone honest. Not reaching for perfection, but reclaiming wholeness. Not silencing your darkness, but letting it speak and listening with love. You don't have to be fearless to heal. You don't have to be perfect to grow. You just have to be willing to face yourself, willing to stay. Willing to believe, even when it hurts, that there's something beautiful waiting inside the mess, because there is. and it's you.